Sup? Psst. Gamer Sups, that's right. You know how I always offer that 10% discount code? Well, that's just not enough for this week. So until this upcoming Friday, just in a couple of days, you can save 22% off anything you buy from the Gamer Sub store using my code Bricky. That's right, 22% off anything in the entire store. That includes my personal flavor, the delicious cherry pineapple sweet 6-pack, both in regular and caffeine free. However, this is only a couple of days, so if you want to stock up and get your haul for 22% off, go ahead and check out the description right now and use code Bricky for the discount. And hey, if it's passed, code Bricky will still get you 10% off everything in the store. Gamer Sups, they're a great sponsor. Their products are good. My flavor is great. And they give me a huge commission. So you're supporting your boy in a huge way. Thank you.
Aika särkyy ikuisuuteen, laukaus kajahtaa. Ei onnellista loppua hän kohtaa milloinkaan. Täs pelissä tää narri lyödään maahan aina vaan. Vaan hetki kuolos lepoa suodaan, jo takas kutsutaan.
This video, while hopefully enjoyable on its own, is a companion piece to two other videos, the initial Alan Wake review and the DLC American Nightmare review. I would highly recommend watching this first before this one. Links in the description and the cards above. I've also made a playlist if that helps. Coming off of Alan Wake's American Nightmare, the game that punched my home and burned my dog, Remedy decided to release Quantum Break for the Xbox One in 2016. This game I remember very little of because I didn't play it. It also apparently does not add or expand upon the Remedy-verse, as we are calling it. Therefore, I skipped it in favor of their next game released in 2019, known as Control. Control released in summer and was published by 505 Games along with their usual cast of wacky, zany individuals in Remedy, including none other than Sam Lake, you hack! While the game is not a direct sequel to anything Alan Wake related and is not part of the same world as Quantum Break, it is still very important in the Remedy verse, and it goes a little something like this.
There's a hole hidden behind that poster that leads to the real world. We all feel safe in that room. But sometimes something crawls out from behind the poster. And the ones that see it happen freak out and try to forget what they saw.
Control opens with a genuinely strange cutscene, including lots of very stark imagery centered around quick cuts and lots of red, gray, and white. You are at the Federal Bureau of Control, or FBC, also known as simply the Bureau. You play as Jesse Faden, this sharply dressed redhead here, and you are very excited to start your brand new job as a janitor's assistant.
There you are. You are here about the job. Janitor's assistant. You need to go to the interview. Go that way to the elevator.
Thanks. Elevator that way. Got it.
Very good. I'm Ahti, the janitor, by the way.
The entire opening of Control is really hard to explain without giving away everything. This is one of those games that is going to be coming at you at just lightning speeds with all kinds of questions. I have been in the game for 10 minutes and I am already lambasted with curiosity. And these aren't even normal questions like, who is Jesse? Why am I here? Where am I? No, it's much more concerning questions like, what the hell is the Federal Bureau of Control? What in the world is going on in this opening? Why is there an internal lockdown in this building? Why could Sam Lake just not resist himself?
We live in a room, and there's a poster on the wall.
Don't mention Shawshank.
We stare at it and
okay, good.
A few moments later.
Like in that movie, what is it called?
No!
The prison movie.
No way! Sam Lake, you hack! Why was there a painting here that turned into a doorway? And oh, I don't know. Why can the funny Finnish janitor read my mind?
Ahti the janitor is a friendly face in my book.
Better than somebody with no face at all.
So yeah, like, considering I know what happens in this game, it's very difficult to not explain it all to you right now for the sake of understanding how the game's plot progresses, but I'm going to do my best. Rewatching the footage to put together the script actually gave me substantially more appreciation for the game. It gives you a lot more of those, oh, right, moments going through it again. So you get an incredibly good opening credits and title card scene that just oozes style. You make your way to the director's office and you find him shot in the head, presumably taking his own life. I can't show you these things because YouTube demonetizes me immediately the moment I show any type of, you know, slip and slide. You then pick up his firearm and are treated to a multitude of cutscenes and explanations discussing what the hell is happening. The firearm that this man just used is explained by Dr. Darling, my beloved, played by the real live-action Matthew Peretta, known for his incredible role as Alan Wake. Yeah, this is Alan Wake's VA. He's just here. This gun is known as the service weapon. It is an OOP, or object of power, and it can create AWEs, or altered world events. This object of power is the service weapon, which is a special object that once bound to the user will become the new director of the Bureau, chosen by the board, a gigantic pyramid that speaks with lots of slashes. Are you following? No, neither did I. Terminology is something we're going to have to get really into here. So, class is in session. An object of power, OOP, is an item that appears mundane, but is actually paranatural in some way or another. This is a very, and I mean very, similar concept to the SCP fandom objects that you see floating around on the internet. For example, take my microphone. If it was an object of power, an OOP, it might have some fancy trait where if I speak into it at a certain volume, I am sent back 10 minutes in time.
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
Or maybe it turns me invisible. Or deafens everyone in a 10-mile radius. Or causes a thermonuclear detonation. All of those things I just said are AWEs, or altered world events. An altered world event are things that happen in a trans-dimensional style due to the effects of an object of power. So if my AirPods ran out of battery and then caused the whole town to go blind for a full day, that would be an object of power causing an altered world event. An OOP causes an AWE, and then I receive CBT. The object of power that you've just picked up is the service weapon. The service weapon is a firearm that has magical firearm properties, but it is more particularly the main weapon bestowed on the director of the Bureau. This is a Thor's hammer situation where you need to be worthy to become the director, or else you just die, stated here by Dr. Darling.
Now, the service weapon is, of course, a prime example of an OOP, a very powerful one. Ingrained in the Bureau's DNA, a key component in our prime candidate program. Come out of that Russian roulette a winner and you're it.
This is chosen by the board, the gigantic floating pyramid, which is a paranatural entity beyond our understanding, located in the dimension the astral plane, which you have just been teleported to right now. The astral plane is not only a totally different dimension, but it serves as the game's combat tutorials. Now that you have your own new object of power, the service weapon, you have been chosen by the giant pyramid that talks all funny, the board, to become the new director of the Bureau. And your first order of business is to shoot shit. That was a lot of information. It took me longer than I'd like to figure it all out. I'm doing you a favor.
Something's coming. This threat. An attack. Duty as director. Keep the Bureau safe.
This is where we get to the meat of the game as the new director. It also means I don't need to be terminology Bricky anymore, and we get to talk about gameplay. Now, you're probably wondering how Control plays, considering it's a third-person shooter developed by Remedy, and Alan Wake was technically also that. Turns out Remedy have actually gotten a little better at their combat over the past, I don't know, a decade, because not only does Control's gameplay blow Alan Wake completely out of the water, it in its own right is fantastic. It's your pretty standard over-the-shoulder shooter, but it specifically harkens back to feelings of playing my dear darling Mass Effect. Not only does it look a lot like it, but it feels a lot like it as well, except Commander Shepard tank treads is not quite the case. You can move around easily and freely in your environment. Firing your service weapon is quick and sweet, and a particularly impressive thing to note is the destructive environment. It isn't destructive as a massive scale like a Battlefield game or an immersive sim, but it's visually impressive to watch as shots and melee attacks absolutely tear apart all of the areas of the map. Good old Jesse here moves a lot more like a traditional third-person shooter game that just has a lot more smoothness to it. The crouching, the cover system isn't really anything to get excited about, but you aren't going to be spending a lot of time doing it because the way you move around and interact with the enemies is just miles above the previous stuff. When you get done with some preliminary combat, you actually enter a big fancy red room with a big giant pyramid on the top, and this room involves another kind of mini sort of combat with the craziness that the room has become, seeing it all weird and all placed around the place, before you cleanse this control point in the center and put the room back where it's supposed to go. After this, you get to meet Emily, who is a fantastic character that I genuinely think should have a hell of a lot more screen time.
And you entered the building when it was already in the lockdown before you became the new director? How?
I'm not ready to tell her about you yet.
A janitor let me in.
I love it. This is fucking unbelievable. I can't even.
Side characters in Control are a bit of a weird thing. There are a couple side characters that are really engrossing and have a lot to offer, both to the narrative and in their performance. But those side characters are, ironically, not ones that Jesse interacts with. Emily, for example, is a great time. She's a complete nerd and just loves to talk about all kinds of science stuff, but she's generally relegated to giving you occasional side quests and answering a few of your questions and not much more. She doesn't really have a motivation outside of sciencing stuff. The strongest side characters in this game are Dr. Darling, my beloved, and Director Trench, but these are people that you do not speak with directly. It's also kind of funny because Control has excellent voice acting when you're not looking at people. It's rather difficult to appreciate how good this voice acting is when you are looking at the character and their voice does not sync up with their model. Unfortunately for Control, a lot of their budget went to the game's engine, how it looks, etc., and not the facial animations of basically anybody. Control had a budget of about $30 million, which is crazy to consider. That's not a particularly expensive game for what they're going for, but it's not really a cheap one either. Clearly, a lot of sections of Control look and feel very AAA, whether it's the graphics, art direction, voice acting, gameplay systems, environmental destruction, all that stuff is phenomenal. But a corner had to be cut somewhere, and let me tell you, it's the faces.
I think he knew this was coming, or suspected. He came up with the HRAs, the Hadron Resonance Amplifiers. I think they're what saved us.
Whatever he is. He mentioned something called the hotline.
It's what we call the power plant. You know, the big rumbling metal thing. Salvador, head of security, asked me to protect it in case of an attack.
Jessie in particular seems like she's chewing gum all the time. Her lower jaw just never once is really be closed or stable at any point during her speech. Emily has her mouth open very wide all the time, just for the most part, and it's quite distracting with how flat and still all of their faces are. Like, this is very much a my face is tired level stuff. But as I mentioned, it unfortunately pulls away from what I consider to be very genuine voice acting of pretty much all the side characters when speaking with Jesse.
I'm here to perform the directorial override to get the lockdown lifted.
Yeah, Chief Arish, FBC Security. I'm just... Oh, hang on, you're the new director. It's a pleasure, ma'am.
Let's skip the formalities, please.
Right. Faden, ma'am.
Like, when they're talking with her, their conversations feel real. They feel like they have all those mannerisms, like breathing out a little bit, or small chuckles, or little clicks with their mouth. Everything comes out so realistically, but then you're watching these cardboard faces on them and it completely throws you out. It is a very strange thing to see. But our story continues. Jesse has to go out and basically try to fix all the craziness that has happened with this new enemy that we've called the Hiss. And whatever it's doing to take over people, Jesse is immune to. But she can't necessarily save anyone either. The only people that are not affected outside of Jesse are those wearing the funny little microphones that Emily is wearing, called HRA devices. So in order to find a way to stop the Hiss, we are looking for the Hotline, another object of power, which is this old school rotary telephone kind of sort of thing that allows the director to communicate immediately with the board, giant pyramid, remember, or the dead. Kinda. In-game, it's a very cool way of storytelling. Whenever you see any clips that have Director Trench on it, played by James McAfee, rest in peace, of course, his stuff is all from the Hotline, post-death, him helping out Jesse from beyond the grave. And that in its own right is a really neat concept, especially mixing with the awesomeness that is the way the board talks. But first, before we get anything Hotline related, we get to get a new object of power, the Soviet floppy disk. And let me tell you, this thing, this is the reason you play Control. I see you! Die! That's right. You have full-on telekinesis powers. You can grab anything in the room and throw it at people. And let me tell you, it never gets old. Launch is one of the neatest aspects of Control for a variety of reasons. It is not only a major thing used in the puzzles of this game, as well as traversal, but it is also a constantly adaptive weapon. The game has a fun way of like cheating by no matter where you are, it will find something for you to grab out of the middle of nowhere. Like it'll grab a chunk of rock or something's off the ground, off screen, and pull it to you. Now, granted, as cool as this is, it does require energy, so you can only throw things so often, but it creates cool situations where, you know, sure, you can just chuck a bunch of rocks and stuff at people, it's effective, but if you want to be tactical about it, grab a fire extinguisher or some kind of bomb. Hell, grab injured enemies and throw them at their bros. Both options are very viable. This is why I think Control does its best whenever it's trying to be some kind of power fantasy. You know, you're not really having a cover system or trying to bounce between different options of cover because you don't really need to take much cover. You are a crazy telekinesis SCP director lady with a changeable gun and the Force. Who needs taking cover? And also, like, it just makes the coolest sound. What?
And now for something completely different.
So you make your way to the Hotline and you utilize a very special object of power, the light cord. 3 pulls and you get transported to the Ocean View Motel. This is basically a gateway between dimensions, and it's an incredibly interesting narrative device to use, as you have this fancy black pyramid as one of the doors, and that's for the most part the only one you ever get to open. But the design of this area is just extremely unique, and it's always an enjoyable time coming back here because it's a cool concept for a dimensional gateway, and sometimes it's just a little weird. Binding the Hotline to yourself allows you to utilize it in game, not just as a way for you to re-listen to statements on the board, but also because it speaks with the dead. So Trench from the afterlife is giving you advice and helping you figure out your next move.
It is a phone. It's an object of power. It doesn't connect to any typical network. A direct line to the astral plane and the board. And my hypothesis is, under the right conditions, to other planes of existence as well.
A director needs a team. My management team. These people know the secrets of the Bureau as well as I do. Some even better.
So far, Control has been an incredibly engrossing game. Its gameplay is excellent and far better than previous titles. The art design is some of the best I have ever seen. This enjoyable combination of 80s Cold War aesthetic mixed with brutalism and a ton of gray, white, and red. It gives this feeling that no other game has. Unfortunately, this is one of its faults because Control blows its load incredibly quickly and takes a lot longer to recover than I'd like. There has been so much that we've discussed already between the SCP objects of power, mixing with the alternate dimensions, the altered world events, the board, the Bureau, all under the roof of the oldest house, which in its own right is an entity we haven't even talked about yet. The walls shift and move as they do because this house shifts and moves because it's basically alive. The building you're in is completely dead center in New York City and nobody can see it because it does not want to be seen. And also, we're actually in modern day. All the 80s stuff, yeah, that's because the oldest house doesn't like high-tech shit. So they have to use all this older technology, which gives you the ability to have Cold War art direction while being in modern day, which is just so badass. You'll even notice that a lot of the guards walking around have old Lewis guns as their weaponry. But it's a little hard to explain the oldest house, so I mean, I could just get some help.
Building shifts occur at random and without warning, but with the Bureau's cutting-edge technology, we can stabilize the oldest house. Safe employees are happy employees.
The game comes at you so hard and so fast that all of this jargon, all of these definitions, all of these characters, both in-game and live action, are swelling into your brain. And while it is really exciting, it's a lot of momentum that the game can't keep up with. Now, normally I would applaud a slower pace after something so exciting to relax the viewer, and indeed we will touch on that later, but this is the wrong kind of slowdown. There are a total of 10 major story missions in Control. Once you've received the hotline, you completed mission 2. Act 2 of the game goes from mission 3 through probably around mission 6, and unfortunately, it's not very interesting. When I look back at the footage for the game, I was just so enraptured by the opening that I kind of forgot I basically did diddly dick for multiple hours in the middle section of Control. You're told to go seek out Trench's team. In doing so, you get a couple of pretty awesome new powers, such as like a quick dash, as well as a big old rock shield. You go to the maintenance sector and stop the oldest house from blowing up. You then go find Marshall and help her make some more HRA devices to keep people alive. Wait, how many are there in total? 4? I have 4 of the 5.
So, you need to find all the punch
I got it, lady. I'm working on it. Don't rush me. Our use dimensions.
Each punch card should correspond to a terminal.
Yeah, I got that.
These whiteboard drawings may be important.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Yeah, if you have the 2 on the right, I looked at that whiteboard. Oh my god. Like the Triforce one over there. Shut the fuck up! You cannot make those devices because you don't have enough of something called BlackRock, and so you need to go get that BlackRock to then go make more devices. Only then, after doing all of that, do you end up doing what you came here to do. Now, it's not all bad. You do get to meet Arish, who's a fine character, very well voice acted, but much like Emily, doesn't do a whole lot in the actual game. Marshall also is a decent character, who's also well voice acted and quite a hard ass, but doesn't do a whole lot yet. But we haven't even discussed why Jesse is here. And I think that's one of the issues I have with her character. Jessie is a tough character to talk about. Some people love her unconditionally, and some people think she's flat as a board. This isn't quite the time to go deeper into that. We'll touch on that later. But the reason she's here, the reason she's even at the FBC, is because she's looking for her missing younger brother. The building that never wants to be found was found because Jessie has a voice in her head she calls Polaris. When she was a younger kid, she and her brother lived in the town of ordinary. Sam Lake, you hack, and found an object of power that was a slide projector. The slide projector actually made gateways to other dimensions, each of them being an individual slide. By messing with this as kids, straight out of a Stephen King book, because you know, Sam Lake, you hack! They caused all kinds of issues, like their friend turning into a melted dog and causing every adult in the entire town to disappear. Since the Federal Bureau of Control is the combination of Gatekeeper and Gestapo, they came in, interrogated them, and kidnapped her brother away 17 years ago as she was able to miraculously escape them. With all the slides burned by Jessie except for one, where she found Polaris, eventually, years later, Polaris sent her to the oldest house to get her brother back. It's a 17-year revenge story / I'm coming to cause problems kind of situation. Now, it's revealed not too late that she's here for her brother Dylan. She tells Emily at the end of mission 3, and therefore she's instructed to go talk to Marshall, who should have better knowledge about Dylan's whereabouts. But once you talk to Marshall, the main goal here is to get more HRAs produced so that people aren't going to have issues with being infected, but then you can't have enough HRAs produced, so you go do this entire BlackRock mission, and while it's albeit very pretty in a cool area, it's just not part of the main story, and only then are you told about Dylan's whereabouts. This wouldn't be so much of an issue if it wasn't compounded by another major problem of Control, which is just navigating the world. Control's map is not great. I'd honestly call it pretty bad. And being able to get around a lot of areas, maintenance specifically, is tedious as all hell. If you look at the map, just a screenshot here, you're probably thinking, well, you're in the blue area right now, but no, you're not in the blue area. That represents the above section, and the grayed out areas are the below section, which is even more infuriating when you're in an area that has a ton of floors. This makes it even worse because Control seems like it maybe wanted to be a Souls game at first, or at least borrow a few of their mechanics. The individual control points that you cleanse kind of feel like bonfires. You do a lot of upgrading when you're there. You level up your character when you're there, and also whenever you die, you get sent back to one. There is also a slight resource situation where the more things you kill, the more of this currency you gain, but when you die, you lose a little bit of that currency. So with a bit of those combinations, it makes you think that maybe in the really early stages of this game, they wanted to make it with a similar mechanic to this, but it ended up getting scrapped later on through development. That being said, it does mean that every time you die, it's a particular pain in the ass because you get sent back to these control points that are not too abundant, and apparently on release were even more lacking. They're not scarce enough to the point where they're huge important things you gotta be really careful about and worry about your health and all that, but they're not common enough to alleviate the annoyance of dying. This, compounded with Control's not great map, means that you'll be doing a bit more confused wandering than you'd probably like. Most objectives give you just a general idea of where they are, having a large yellow icon in that section, and you just kind of need to figure it out on your own. But the game also isn't a very exploring kind of game. It's got secrets and hidden areas and all that, but it doesn't feel like an exploration game, even though it tries to be. So while in the beginning of the game, things are feeling fantastic, but with time, each individual mechanic feels like it's only at 70% strength. It's as if they wanted to be 6 different games and couldn't decide on which was the standout. So the game feels like it's a half-baked version of 6 different concepts. Are we a Souls-like checkpoint system equipped with central executive that's definitely not Firelink Shrine? Maybe a little. Are we an exploration game with hidden items and upgrades for that? Sometimes. Are we an open world game with fast travel? Here and there. Are we a Metroidvania where you get upgrades and movement tools to go back and do stuff? Sometimes. We haven't even touched on upgrades either. Upgrading Jessie is easy. It's the usual currency you gain, but weapons actually have mods and resources, and these resources can only be found in certain areas. So there's also a farming section of the game too, but it's only half-baked. Enemies don't spawn reliably, so farming a certain material isn't reliable and honestly rather tedious. So we can add Are we a weapon farming upgrade system game to that list? So that's why Act 2 of the game is such a difficult one, because it's mostly busy work with mechanics that are starting to show their biggest issues, and all the while not aiming for the main objective of the story. Remedy clearly had a lot of cool ideas they wanted Control to be, and in the end, by adding all of them, it comes off as directionless. But if those fins are good for one thing, it's making a baller janitor, and at least you get to work for him a bit.
Yes, yes, easy peasy. It's just around the corner. But first, we need to get you working. Very small, couple of hours job.
Something tells me it's gonna be more than that.
Yeah, you think there's a dog buried in this? I can tell you are not yesterday's Krause's son.
He sends you to go kill a shit monster, so, you know, I mean, that's pretty cool.
I am the great mighty Pooh.
I guess now would be a fun time to talk about something a bit more enjoyable that you see a lot of during this section of the game. Let's talk about Dr. Darling, my beloved, and Director Trench. These are the two live action sequences that exist in the game, and it's kind of crazy how well they fit. Live action segments in games is often not a very good idea, as they feel very out of place, but these don't. And that could simply be because they're filming in such a bizarre way. One of them is like an old school science experiment, and the other is like a dream sequence. It could also be that I'm just used to it after playing Alan Wake 1 as well as the American Nightmare, but both of these sections are very enjoyable. Director Trench is played by James McAfee, who is the voice of Max Payne and has unfortunately passed away rather recently, which makes it even more sad how well he killed his role. He was fantastic. He's clearly a traumatized man as he discusses things like his family and his work, but his input is invaluable, and he's played with such a strong, gruff demeanor that you can't help but just eat it up whenever he's on screen.
This threat could destroy the Bureau, everything I've built. Destroy me. A web spun, turning this place against me.
Dr. Darling is a great contrast, as he is a complete goofball with the same voice as Alan Wake because he's played by Matthew Peretta, who plays Alan Wake. Except in his live action roles, he's normally showing off various things like objects of power, how they work, or other experiments that go along with the story. Dr. Darling was actually nominated for a Performance of the Year in 2019 when Control came out, and at the beginning, it might seem like he's just a general scientist type, but as the game goes on, it very intelligently adds more and more recordings of Dr. Darling going through the issues presented recently. There's a lot of reasons why he's Dr. Darling, my beloved. His astounding performance is part of that, but also just how he changes as a character throughout the game is really intriguing. He's clearly a man who appreciates the sciences, and what's going on here he's so excited to learn about. Like, it's multiple dimensions and all kinds of crazy stuff that was only in fairy tales.
I will dedicate. I'm never going home.
But when that comes to bite him, it can get pretty dark. Now, the real reason he's my beloved is later on, but I can't spoil that bomb, can I? It's revealed throughout the game that Director Trench made a mistake and brought work home with him, so to speak, which cost the life of his daughter and had his wife divorce him. Fearing to make the same mistake, Dylan, who clearly was kidnapped by the Bureau, was sent to be raised by Dr. Darling. Of course, raised by basically means the same thing they did to Eleven in Stranger Things. Certain individuals in Control are para-utilitarian, which means that they have the ability to use fancy psychic powers and all other kinds of jazz when binding with an object of power. Jesse is clearly one of these people, but Dylan is one of these as well. And they have been grooming him, no, not that way, to have him become the director in Trench's stead. When you go look for him in the Panopticon, he is part of the Prime Candidate program, which is why he is labeled as P6. The Panopticon is actually a really cool place. You get to see a ton of other objects of power and how they're kept secure. It's unfortunate though, because it is managed by a fucking Redditor, but you do get some neat stuff like the Weeping Angel SCP, because of course you do, and it's a giant fridge with Giga Chad Phillip here watching it for a full 24 hours without blinking because the Redditor forgot he was even there.
Oh shit, I forgot about fridge duty.
But in the case of Dylan, that does mean that the last 17 years has been under the guise of Dr. Darling and his crew, which were not the best parents. And when you see the media they showed him in order to describe what was going on, it becomes pretty clear that they didn't quite know what they were doing.
Some brains can talk to each other. We call this ESP.
ESP?
And if your brains are just right, you'll get to sit in the big chair.
What if I don't want the big chair?
Everyone wants the big chair, man!
Hey, Mr. Bones, what time is recess? So yeah, that didn't work, and Dylan ended up killing a bunch of people and was considered no longer a proper option for director. I don't need to tell you why. When you finally reach his cell, he is no longer there. He's escaped, yet has been infected with the hiss and has made his way back to Central Executive, where he turned himself into Emily and is back in temporary confinement. Bit of a curveball here, and a little annoying that we had to go through all of this for him to not even be there and be back in Firelink Shrine. But the game makes up for this in the fact that Dylan rocks.
This is an ordinary song about an ordinary girl from an ordinary town. It's the ordinary story. She worked an ordinary job in an ordinary office and something. And that's all I can remember of that dream.
Dylan is the best performance in the game, in my opinion, outside of Dr. Darling, my beloved. I think the reason for this is because his bizarre demeanor works with the facial animations. Him looking hollow and stunted actually is accurate for what this traumatized kid infected by the hiss, raised by scientists in a lab, would look like. You don't really get a clear conversation with Dylan, as the hiss has definitely taken its toll on his brain.
Stop
it!
Orange peel!
Shit!
But you can come back to him a few times for interesting conversations about his dreams. Some are enlightening, some are a bit meta, and one really stands out.
I was in a dark place, and there was a dark man there. His name was Mr. Door.
I will say this part's a bit short. Jessie is here for her brother. She spends all of this time to get her brother, and when you finally do get Dylan, all you really get out of it is a couple conversational pieces and his delirious dream rambles. The only tangible information you received from Dylan is that the slide projector from Ordinary was brought back to the FBC, which in fairness is a pretty big deal. But to put this in perspective, this is the beginning of Mission 7 and the start of Act 3. It's a relatively weak reveal despite it being your main objective. Like, you spend 6 full missions, 2 full acts, wanting to get Dylan back, and when you finally do, he's not there, already turned himself in, and then just kind of talks random gibberish. Now, this difficulty is only compounded because the next part of the game is you finding the Ordinary AWE that they have built in the FBC. But for the entirety of Mission 7, your goal is to, of course, find the slide projector, which when you get to the end of the mission in Dr. Darling's lab, it's no longer there. So that's another time in which we've done an entire mission to get something that isn't there. More than anything, this served to give us a lot of the backstory to how the Bureau handled the situation in Ordinary, and naturally, as a giant shady organization, it wasn't done well or with much tact.
A dump is a place for lost things. Things that have been thrown away.
Were you a dump?
Did you ever feel that way when you were growing up, Jesse?
Sam Lake, you hack. What we do learn is that the slide projector and the last remaining slide has been moved to dimensional research through a fancy thing called the ashtray maze. Now, this maze is entirely to be utilized by the director and is unsolvable unless you have bound this cigar and ashtray to yourself. So, who else to get through this than the man of the house himself, Ati the janitor. The mission is called Finish Tango for a reason. You follow the visions of Ati to a restricted area maintenance that, by golly, sure looks like Ash Lake, doesn't it? But before you meet your lovely boss, you need to go to a combat trial, and this is the perfect time to discuss the combat of Control in the depth I've been wanting to. By this time, you should have all of your abilities, and that does include the ability to fly, or levitate, but it's basically fly. I mean, look at this, it's so cool. So, Control handles like a dream. Jessie moves with such a fluidity, and the abilities she has all work perfectly, especially when combined with the environment. In fact, I may go so far as to say that this is the best Star Wars Jedi simulator game on the market. You have your blaster with all of its different kinds of firing modes. Then you have force throw, force shield, Jedi mind control, flying, dash, and slam. This is just Jedi simulator, and it fucks. What doesn't fuck is how Control does its enemies. It took me a really long time to figure out the issue with this game's combat, and it's this. The game wants you to be a power fantasy, but its enemies stop you from becoming one. Control needed to lean more into the power fantasy aspect of the title. Right now, there is zero reason for you to take cover. There's never a reason to do so, except basically against one single enemy, the guy with the big minigun. You are always moving, always attacking, always shooting, and especially at the end of the game when you have good mods, lots of energy, and crazy new abilities, you truly are the power fantasy character. However, the enemies are only spawned in, often in groups of 4 to 8. There's some variety. You have the kamikaze enemies, ones that fly around and throw things at you, snipers, regular soldiers, heavies, and more, but in my time, the most annoying of these enemies were the ones that dodged my attacks. Certain enemies, when you throw something at them, will dodge almost perfectly the first time, but not the second time. So they aren't really hard to deal with, but they're annoying, and it rids you of a bit of that power fantasy because you aren't able to do anything about it. Close range gunfire enemies are all hit scans, so there's no real dodging, and if you get too close, they actually kind of shred you, but in order to regain health pickups, you need to damage enemies so they spill them out and then run to it to heal up. So the game rewards you from being up close and aggressive, but also punishes you simultaneously because the enemies get that much stronger. Are you seeing the issue here? It rewards both extremely aggressive play in healing and damage, and everything pushes you to this power fantasy, but then when enemies automatically dodge attacks, are in low quantities, and have hit scan guns, it pushes you away from fully enjoying it. There's too much that stops you from embracing that power. I think if you wanted to really perfect this kind of gameplay, you need to drop enemy strength, increase Jesse's abilities, and double the enemy count. Enemy guns do less damage. Enemies don't auto dodge. And you need to have that stupid rock spinny guy not do what he does, stop existing. Then you need to let Jesse go crazier, have her mind control enemies faster, having her throw rock objects at multiple enemies, almost like a target lock where you get to pick a few of them. And then just double the amount of enemies thrown at you. Because right now, I feel like I'm told, yeah, you know, go to town, fuck them up, you're basically magic. But don't get too close. But you have to get too close to them to get healing, or else they'll kill you in half a second, so don't get too close, but you have to get close. It's so unfortunate, too, because the gameplay is, it's so good. It's such a buttery smooth dream, and all it needs is to focus and be adjusted a little bit, and bam, it would be so much better. But at the moment, oh, especially the jukebox challenge missions, you feel like you're some god that needs to one-shot everything, or else it one-shots you. It's just high-level Warframe gameplay. The reason I harp on this so much right now is because you have a wave defense section right before heading to nowhere.
Like in Silent Hill 2, sound like you hack.
And it's where I felt the gameplay issues the most. After this combat, you get a very long lift section that plays the Finnish tango song sung by Ahti. This here is a great moment of relaxation, which I mentioned earlier in the video is important after large explosive moments. It's a minute or so long, but it's a great breakup from what's been happening. Plus, the song slaps because it's sung by Ahti, who's a baller.
Vaan hetki kuolos leposuodaan, jo takas kutsutaan.
I need to take a moment to talk about Ahti. All right. He has about 5 total minutes of dialogue, and he's easily one of the most compelling characters in the game. It clearly starts off as a fun little switch where he's a janitor during a massive crisis, and if you're a bit keen in the opening of the game, he reads your inner monologue and continues to do so throughout the game. Now, for my non-Finnish viewers, and myself, Ahti is the Finnish sea god, king of waves and other kind of Poseidon-ish like titles. Janitor in Finnish has a literal translation to meaning man of the house. This being the oldest house, the conclusion is that Ahti is a sort of dimensional groundskeeper. He's seen in every part of the oldest house, especially areas that actual janitors would definitely not be allowed to go to. Staff comment on his odd demeanor, but Trench explicitly says, don't bother him, let him do his work. I guess that's just what's so lovely and endearing, is that this silly old Finnish janitor man is actually a paranatural entity that maintains the oldest house, and he really needs an assistant, you, because the problem is a bit big now, and he wants to go on vacation.
Vacation? Right.
Yes. No one's gonna cancel my holiday or seat's gonna rattle.
It's so fun to think that this world-ending event is Tuesday for Ahti, and he just really wants that vacation. And he gets it. Look, once you realize that, everything clicks. Going to the interview is doing the gun roulette to make you the director, which is why you got the job, so on and so on. He's a gem and a fantastic addition, giving us some of the most interesting moments in the game.
Did you miss me? Did you have peace in your song?
Yes.
No. Bark don't make a wound. You did good. Take my cassette player. You can borrow it.
The song is a present from my friends to you. It will get you through the maze so you can do your job.
Now, people who are familiar with Control will know for a fact that this next part is the highlight of the game. Navigating the ashtray maze, utilizing Ahti's cassette player, of course, has the Remedy song special, which is Take Control by the Old Gods of Asgard. Not only is this the best part of the game by a country mile, but it's also where that power fantasy actually comes into play. The music is blaring, the area looks amazing, it's a total trip, and because of that, it's the one time that I think it all just comes together perfectly. It's a shame I was so overpowered I couldn't listen to most of the song.
Take control. Take control.
Now, that badass section is over, and you get to enter Dimensional Research, obviously the place where all the important stuff goes on, and a lot of the regular folk are not allowed to be. Dr. Darling, in particular, is very protective of this place.
Do not touch my sand!
Here, they opened up a portal from the slideshow projector and entered the dimension that was the only one left, the same dimension that Jesse and Dylan entered way back when. After doing so, they brought back another paranatural entity. This they called Hadron, and it was a resonance-based being from this dimension. It's in this gigantic form you see here. Now, they don't explain this part super well. They make you go through a lot of digging with between all the audio logs and all of the papers on there to eventually kind of piece it together. So I'm going to paraphrase this pretty heavily. Hedron is a resonance-based being, and Polaris inside Jesse's head is simply a fragment of Hedron. Polaris was pulled to this place, of course, because Hedron is it for the most part. However, it is a resonance being, not a hindsight being. So when you rip off the gigantic HRA, which reminds you stands for Hedron Resonance Amplifier, you have now ripped off its only protective shielding against the hiss, and then it immediately attacks it and kills it. It's a strange section because you spend all this time getting to the fancy Hedron being out of the slideshow, only for you to meet it for half a second and it to die. This allows the hiss to infect Jesse and immediately destroy the entire world. Roll credits. Of course they do the credit fake out because, you know.
Sam Lake, you fucking hack.
No, this next section is Jessie being a 9-to-5 worker for the Bureau. This is all clearly inside of her head, and it's what the hiss is preying on, which is a great time to talk about Jessie. Jessie is a bit of a difficult character to figure out. On one hand, she's very flat one-note character, and on the other hand, she has a lot of interesting personal motivations underneath all of it, and a bit more character than would appear. We do have a little bit of the Schrodinger's voice acting issue here, much like with Alan Wake. Jessie comes off as very flat basically throughout the entire game. However, that is part of her character. There's a whole thing about the need for control and what she's trying to do here. This kind of goes into the idea that she is the best director for the job. The prior directors, being Northmore and Trench, both had major issues that led to their demise. Northmore was a power-hungry asshole who bound himself to every object he could and eventually went nuclear, so they encased him in a giant sarcophagus to power the Bureau. I kind of glossed over that part, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
I suppose at the end of the day, a director's most basic duty is to keep the lights on.
Trench was so obsessed with control and things flying out of hand that it caused him to have massive issues of paranoia when it came to running the Bureau itself, and ultimately, the hiss preyed on that. Jessie is a bit of the every woman. She jokes about being a janitor assistant already way back in the beginning of the game, and despite going to the place that kidnapped her younger brother and spied on her for her entire life, she is relatively nice to everyone there. She's a stone cold character because for the most part, that's how she's had to live her life. But that really goes against a lot of the things she says.
The pill I'm about to make with these samples will make the lower level perfectly safe to traverse.
I feel like I should ask to see her credentials.
You're so funny, Jessie. Ha 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 ha. Jump off a bridge. I don't have a word for it yet, but I feel like this is just forspoken dialogue.
Did I just do that?
Basically, shitty quips that come off as really annoying. Jessie has a bit too many of these quips for her character. It's very strange how she can go from this dark, dour person and then make these kind of Marvel jokes in her head randomly or even during mid-combat. It also doesn't help that she has that like always chewing gum facial expression to go along with all of these. Right here, when the hiss takes control of Jessie, is where we get the best window into her character throughout the entire game. You're forced into this never-ending loop of doing menial tasks for the Bureau basically as just a coffee woman, and everyone is berating you the entire time. The 9-to-5 job, while being quite the nightmare in its own right, is more represented as an avenue to have Jessie's underlying fears be expressed. This is one of the largest characterizations we get out of her throughout the entire game, but that does still create a bit of an issue when it contrasts with her quippy dialogue. It's also where you discover a lot of the same issues with Trench. This is a bit of a loop here, and in order to break it, you need to bring Mail to Trench a few times and kind of take over his position in a way. But doing this, Trench has a seriously long monologue that is very easily missed if you just talk to him too soon. You learn what happened is that when Darling, Trench, and the rest all went into the alternate dimension and brought back Hedron, Trench was infected by the hiss. This played on his excessive paranoia, his fear of running the Bureau, and what it has done to both himself and his family. So, by being so paranoid, the hiss got to him and made him distrust everyone, including Dr. Darling, and he went to go get the slide projector, steal it, and open up a portal to let the hiss out. This is what happened right before Jessie arrived to the FBC, and Trench, most likely realizing what he just did, ended his own life. So now it's Jessie's turn to try and push the hiss out of her mind, and she does so in a very great way. Oh.
Really?
Dr. Darling is long gone now, turned into some god as far as we're concerned. He entered the resonance-based being or something. It turns out he's really jacked. Hey, Matthew Preda. Good gains, dude. It's not important. He's gone for now. It doesn't really matter. But in Jessie's mind, he is absolutely rooting for her from another dimension personally in what might be the best part of the entire video game outside of the ashtray maze. Dr. Darling, my beloved. I originally wanted to put myself in the video, but apparently the Dynamite song is YouTube copywritten. What the hell? about the whole vest.
Life is pain! I hate—
So Jessie, realizing she's dynamite, is able to use this Polaris Hedron in her head to force out the hiss through the power of will. This part's a little weird. She's able to get the hiss out of her head because Hedron is now like fully in her head because Hedron is dead, but she just kind of like girl bosses her way back to sanity. I'm not really kidding here much either. Like, obviously Polaris / Hedron is important here, but she does just kind of will herself to get better. Now, it's a Remedy game, so it's probably a bit more metaphorical, of course, you know, the character and everything like that, but logistically, it's a little weird because it just doesn't make much sense. But regardless, you do it, you push the hiss out, and now your job is to go find the slide projector that Trench opened up, get in there, and shut its ass down and go save Dylan. The final ending section of Control is apparently supposed to be a lot harder than I experienced. I had some of the most busted mods on my weapons and kind of just slaughtered everything through there. I was a blue Powerade girl in a red Gatorade dimension. Nothing really stood a chance. You fight through enemy upon enemy into various floating platforms in this really cool looking boss arena. All the time, Dylan and the Hiss are screaming out, doing their classic "you are a worm through time" orange peel. Then after this extended combat encounter, you see Dylan up there, you go to him, you grab him, you bada bing, bada boom, and here's our ending.
You've taken your boss! Your boss! You!
Dylan's in a coma. I don't know if there's anything of him left in there. If he'll ever find his way back. The portal's been closed, but the Hiss is still in the oldest house. And the lockdown can't be lifted as long as any trace of it remains. I'm working on a solution with my management team, but there is still a long road ahead. I'm the director of the Federal Bureau of Control. We're in this together. You and I.
What a load of shit! Sam Lake, you hack! You like Stephen King too much? What is with your dog shit endings? I was genuinely dumbfounded when I finished this game at how abruptly it just ends. You know, there's this really cool thing called the falling action. You know, once you hit a climax of the story, you have this little bit of falling action, right? And it happens, you know, it kind of smooths out the ending of your game or your movie or your book, and then, you know, and then you end it. We hit climax, and then we just stopped. Sam Lake, you busted and immediately hopped in the Uber. She's still panting, my guy. You didn't even bother to get her a towel. This is like the poorly drawn Game of Thrones horse, except it's not even that way. It's a beautiful horse all the way across, and then you just cut its nose off. You don't get to talk to Dylan. He's not better now. He's just in a coma. There's still a Hiss issue because you gotta do those side missions after the game is over, and it just ends. Now, when I yelled about this game on stream and I freaked myself out, a lot of people were saying, oh, well, yeah, it's not good, but their budget was obviously really low. They probably ran out of time. And I'm like, I get what you're saying. I get that's what you think, but that makes zero sense. Video games are not linear creations. You don't just go chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 9. Oh my God, it's releasing in only 3 weeks. Chapter 10. When games have issues with budget and time, it's not in a linear progress where the last stages of the thing is broken down and suffers issues. Sometimes this happens, but in different ways. Warhammer Rogue Trader is the game that, while I do enjoy, is plagued by massive bug issues and the like in the second half of the game. But you gave me a mostly pretty great experience all the way across, and then you just tripped at the finish line and face planted. I desperately wish I could find out why in the world this was the decision. Why did it end this way? Because it just doesn't make any sense and it's driving me crazy. I feel like I'm being corrupted by the hiss. Even Alan Wake 1, that I also think had a pretty mediocre ending, at least gave us a falling action after the climax. It didn't bust and then log into Destiny 2. So yeah, I desperately am hoping for a behind the scenes with this ending. It doesn't make any sense because despite my issues with the game and what I've harped on before, the experience overall is still fleshed out for the entire game. There wasn't a section of Control where I felt the budget was lacking outside of some difficult technical optimizations and a few times where I crashed. I have issues with decision making, with mechanics, parts like that, but none of it felt unfinished. It just boggles my mind. And it's a really sad thing to see for a game that was so enjoyable. Now, there are 2 DLCs that the game came out with as well, the Foundation and AWE. I had originally assumed that this would make a major difference, as most of my viewers who were watching the game and hearing me complain at nausea about the ending said that the Foundation will make it feel a lot better. So the Foundation is an additional piece of content about 3 to 4 hours long that has you going into one of these interesting catacombs to repair something called the Nail. It's basically a major ley line pillar that allows all the various dimensions from folding in on each other. Right now, the Nail has been blown to shit, and therefore the astral plane in the board's dimension is seeping into yours, and you know, that's not great. For the most part, there isn't anything particularly special about this DLC in terms of gameplay. You get a funny little power that you can use for this particular section, and they introduce you to a new enemy, which is just a melee version of the flying guys that can dodge, so they're very annoying to deal with. But the story is somewhat decent, and the level design in the astral plane is also kind of cool. Marshall came down here and is talking to you through the hotline, which clearly means she's dead, or sometimes close to it. Noticing the hiss was entering this area, having it take over the Nail would be pretty bad news for everyone involved. So Marshall took a bunch of C4 and blew it up because you can't take over a pile of rubble. In between all of this, you have the board angrily discussing their former member called The Former, who you actually fought in a side mission in the base game. This is a neat bit of world building, as there are obviously entities that are not part of the board, and so there can be a little back and forth with that whole thing. But unfortunately, the DLC falls flat because it feels mainly like a sequel setup. You learn a bit more about the board, you learn a bit more about this Former and how these ley lines work, and Jesse comes to the conclusion that maybe I should follow my own path and my own heart instead of listening to these giant paranatural entities that are most likely megalomaniacs. But that's basically how this DLC ends. You fix the Nail, you decide that you're going to take your own path, and it's over. The saving grace is the fact that you get a hiss version of Marshall that's a boss fight at the end, which is the best boss fight Remedy has done so far. This is when I realized that Control needed to be a power fantasy game, and this fight was just honestly excellent. Marshall reminded me a lot of the Lazarevich fight from Uncharted 2, throwing giant swaths of grenades at you, but for the most part, she had a decent amount of health, moved in a proper way, and had a lot of enemies and other ads to deal with, while you yourself got a bunch of friends to help you out. It was very fun. It's the best boss fight that I've played so far in all the Alan Wakes besides 2 and Control. Finally, we have AWE. Now the Foundation is fine. It's not as good as the base game, and it's mainly a lot of sequel bait, but it is worth playing. The AWE DLC is probably the thing you're looking for if you're watching this along with all the other Alan Wake games. The AWE DLC, or the Alan Wake expansion, or the Alan Wake Everywhere DLC, is a fun little foray into the original game with Jesse. Now, this may have been a crazy thing to see back in 2019 when this came out, but clearly I was already informed that this was part of the Remedy verse. So I was generally able to piece together all of the major reveals going on in this expansion. If Alan Wake exists in the same universe as Control, then that means things like objects of power, para-utilitarianism, altered world events, all these things also exist. Because of this, we can synthesize a couple of theories. Cauldron Lake itself could be an object of power, Alan Wake could be a para-utilitarian person, and activate it in a way. The Bright Falls event is in fact referred to as an altered world event, and even Sarah, the cop, her dad was an ex-Bureau agent. Now, if we know anything about Alan Wake, he's a writer.
My name is Alan Wake.
and I'm a writer.
And the ability to shape reality through the pages he writes is very much in line with the weird stuff we've learned from Control. It creates a situation where all of the weird wackiness of the first game actually is defined, and what's really special about this is that it doesn't necessarily break the game's immersion. There's a genuine fear that by explaining the supernatural nature of the Bright Falls event, you take away from it. Sam Lake said so himself when Sam Lake quoted his favorite person ever, Stephen King.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear.
So it is genuinely interesting to see them explain a lot of it away, but not entirely, and still leave a decent amount of intrigue. Alan constantly writes about trying to escape from the dark place. We even get a little Mr. Scratch in there, pretending to be Thomas Zane, voiced by the live-action version of Alan Wake, hilariously enough. And for the most part, the entire expansion is just huge fan service towards the first Alan Wake game. Hell, even the main boss is a crazy deformed Dr. Hartman, which you finally get to put in the dirt after a series of incredibly annoying and kinda shit encounters where you have to light up a room like 5 times. There are a lot of fun reveals in this expansion, but I think it's been soured a little bit just because I already knew that this was part of the Remedy-verse. I can see someone who was a big fan of Alan Wake play this expansion back in 2019 or 2020, whenever this came out, and just be absolutely mind blown, not just because of how it relates to the Bright Falls AWE, but also because it ends with a major sequel tease for Alan Wake 2. Overall, the AWE expansion is really fun as someone who likes the first Alan Wake game, despite my 6 out of 10 rating, but it's not something that I think is on its own particularly great. The gameplay is pretty bad, the Hartman fight is also not particularly good, and you spend the entire time having to talk to the Redditor Langston, which I just don't care for. The Foundation is the much better expansion, and even that is a little bit mid, especially because most of these story beats feel like they're setting up the sequel. God, this is so hot in the sweater vest. But that is the overall story of Control. My title for this video is the worst 8 out of 10 I've ever played. You'll notice that it has a much different tone compared to Alan Wake, the best 6 out of 10 I've ever played. This is a very hard thing to describe because it's much more of a feeling than it is anything else. I was speaking with someone about how fans of Alan Wake talk about the game. They tend to exclaim, "I love Alan Wake, it's so mid," with a full chest and pure excitement. It is almost this feeling of reveling in the fact that it's not good, yet you love it. Control gives me the opposite feeling. Control makes me say, oh, this game is so great, but God, I wish some things were different. When I gave Alan Wake 1 a review, in my chest, in my mind, I was saying, oh, I love this game a lot, but it's really not good, so I can't give it more than a 6. When I think about Control, I say, oof, it's got some real problems, but it's so solid, and I can't give it less than an 8. Because here's the final truth, and it's something that I've noticed time and time again. People will take shit and unique over decent and corporate any day of the week, or at least in terms of how they talk about the product. Completely fine but uninspired is half of the Marvel catalog, yet they make insane amounts of money. But I don't go to bed thinking about Marvel movies. Control is a game that is so unabashedly following a particular concept. It has an art direction that is unmatched. It has a story that is, while wacky and weird and has problems of its own, is fascinating. The game is the worst 8 out of 10 I've played because it falls apart and cracks at every possible seam at some point or another, but it is so unique, so incredibly one of a kind that I cannot possibly, in good conscience, lower the score below an 8. There is too much passion behind this. Hell, even after everything, one of the Remedy developers went out to work on their own time on a mod to continue support for Control. It's a mod I highly recommend downloading. It adds native HDR, upgrades the DLSS, gives ultra-wide support, couple other fixes. Control has my glowing recommendations across the board. This game will not be for everyone, but it's still a game that deserves to be played. It is truly the worst 8 out of 10 I have ever played, and I mean that with nothing but respect and glowing praise.
Shawshank Redemption. That's the name of the movie I was thinking of earlier. Not important, but that was it.
Sam Lake, thank you everyone so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Get some merch. There's a Brickle tee. It's also in hoodie form. Buy that. There's a My Beloved. It's got the pants, it's sweatpants. They're amazing. I wear them like every single day. They're the best sweatpants you will ever own. I'm being serious. Orchid8.com, link in the description. I will see you next time for Alan Wake 2. Oh boy.
Come on. Obviously you're a skater.